My name is Devyani, and this is Between Sessions, a weekly breakdown of the news, rumors, and racing stories shaping Formula One. This week, we're talking all things Dutch Grand Prix, but before that, let's jump into the newsstand to talk about what's going on. So, the FIA has just published the results of the latest ADUO, or Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities Evaluation. And if you're not familiar, this is a system that was set up for the 2026 to 2030 power unit regulations to help keep the competition close. So basically the FIA monitors the internal combustion engine data, so torque, engine speed, among a bunch of other things, and they will determine which engine is the benchmark of the grid, and if you're between 2 to 4% off of that, you'll get some upgrade opportunities, and if you're more than 4% off of that, you'll get a little bit more. And the point is to keep the competition close, as well as to give the engine manufacturers opportunities to bring upgrades, performance design improvements, all that good stuff. And so the evaluation is set in 3 time periods over the course of the year. So the first one is Australia to Canada. The second one is the end of Canada to Hungary. And so they published the results of the first 2 of those periods. And so for the first period, they have said that Mercedes, so Red Bull are determined to be the benchmark of the grid. Mercedes have been determined to be between the 2 to 4% window, and Audi, Ferrari, and Honda have determined to be above 4%. So that means that Mercedes will get 1 additional homologation in 2026 and 1 more in 2027, and the other 3, so Audi, Ferrari, and Honda, will get 2 additional homologations for 2026 and 2 in 2027. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how is it possible that Red Bull have the best engine if and Mercedes are so far ahead in the constructors. How is it fair that they get to do this? And the answer is we don't really know. The data and all the stuff that the FIA used to analyze the ICE data that they have isn't available to us for the most part, so we don't really know why these determinations are made, just that the goal of this was to keep the competition close, and hopefully it's doing that. I mean, it's a testament to the work that Red Bull and Ford are doing, that the fact that their engine has been lauded, their power unit has been lauded as the best of the grid, but it's like the performance and the results aren't really tied to that in the same way. So I don't know, it's tough, but it is what it is, and we'll see how this progresses, because we have 1 more of these, the third of these periods from, I think, the Dutch Grand Prix to, I believe, Mexico. So we'll see how it plays out. The other headline from the FIA is that they are set to rule on the whole Monaco controversy. If you don't remember, essentially, a lot of drivers got penalties in Monaco for speeding in the pit lane, and some of them served their penalties, but others didn't. And in the end, we found out that there was like a timing loop error. So they were calculating the pit lane speed incorrectly, and Pierre Gasly was one of the drivers who did not serve the time penalty, and then afterwards Alpine, and he got like penalties before doing that, and then Alpine kind of challenged the ruling and they appealed, and they won, so he got his podium back. Initially he had fell from 3rd to 7th, and then he got his podium back, which dropped Oscar Piastri and I think somebody else in the order. So after that, Red Bull and McLaren jointly submitted an appeal to the FIA's International Court of Appeals to basically look at this whole thing and against the result of June's Monaco Grand Prix. And it's important to remember that we're now heading into September. This happened June 7th, so it's just a long, drawn-out process. But essentially, on Tuesday, they were handling the appeal from McLaren and Red Bull, and several drivers were handed time penalties for exceeding pit lane speeds, but we know that wasn't actually true. That was like a calculation error. And after the right of review from Alpine and, they restored his podium, now Red Bull and McLaren launched an appeal procedure. And we'll see what happens, because McLaren was basically saying this is a twofold matter of interest for them. One, for the integrity of the sport and calculating things properly, and how are we going to go about applying penalties and taking them off and putting them back. And the second one is obviously McLaren's vested interest, because this caused Oscar Piastri to drop positions, and so obviously they want those points back. And it's hard to see what the options are, except for, no, this appeal isn't going to work, or we're going to cancel the results of the Monaco Grand Prix. And it's just not how you want to see racing. And like, obviously the easy answer is for these kinds of errors not to happen, but this is a really good case study and it's going to be a really important precedent to set in what happens when the organizers or the FIA or whoever make a mistake in these timing loops and it affects the race, and like how does that play out in the aftermath. So I'm curious to see how the International Court of Appeals is going to handle this matter, because it's going to set precedent and that's important. The other news we got out of the Dutch Grand Prix week, outside of this being the last Dutch Grand Prix for the foreseeable future, but we learned that Max Verstappen is going to be staying at Red Bull until 2030, or he signed another contract extension that will keep him at Red Bull until 2030, but of course he'll most likely still have similar exit clauses or performance clauses with the team so that if need be, he can, get out of there quick. And then we also learned that Williams is going to be keeping Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon through 2027. It looks like Alex was just confirming a 1-year extension to 2027 and, keeping his options open a little bit, theoretically. And then Carlos Sainz apparently has signed a multi-year deal with Williams. And this has to be a testament to James Vowles, because aside from the fact that there's not really anywhere else to go other than like a lateral move or maybe a tiny bit upwards, this is just like James... on one side, it's like James Vowles and the power of being able to speak and show confidence, and I don't know, I still am in awe that James Vowles managed to keep Carlos Sainz. And in fact, but he gave Carlos Sainz what he wanted. Like, there's rumors that, his salary is going up to $30 million, which is, I think, close to what Lando makes at McLaren. So obviously there were concessions made from Williams' point of view, but they want to keep these drivers. They want to keep going in this direction. This year has clearly been such a big letdown from what they had promised, for James. Going back to 2023, he's been talking about how, 2024 and 2025 are throwaway years, but this is when it really starts. And it's just been, bad move after bad move. So I don't know. It's like, it's going to all come out in the wash a little bit, but I wonder if Carlos Sainz wishes he had listened to his dad and gone to Audi. Moving into tea time, which is nothing's confirmed. These are kind of just rumors. Number one, F1 viewership numbers apparently have been down since rights moved to Apple TV. And that's like not surprising. A lot of people, it used to be ESPN, and this is in the US. It used to be ESPN who was the commercial rights holder for F1 in the US. And a lot of people have ESPN included in their, channels, or they have the Disney Plus bundle, which includes like Hulu, Disney Plus, ESPN. And obviously moving it to a completely different platform is going to decrease the numbers. But also there were a couple of races that were like shown on Netflix, or, there's a couple of races that were shown on ABC. And it's kind of like, in one of these transitions year, it's going to be low. That's to be expected. So I don't think this is that shocking as everyone's making it out to be. It is a little harder to access. Some people don't want to have a whole new subscription, and you can get these you can just stream them on places for free illegally, but you can, and a lot of people do that. The second thing is that the Madrid track, the Madring, I think is what it's being called, they tested there for F3 cars, and there was this big, I think it was Kim Illman, the photographer, who posted that there were 19 red flags, and everyone's like, this is just like Jeddah, or like a little bit different. And I think yes, there were 19 red flags, sure. A lot of those are going to probably be for like scrapes on the wall or light contact, but also these were F3 drivers, like 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds driving. I mean, sure, we have some people those age in F1, but like the level is different, right? And also they were doing it was a 2-day test, and these tests were like hours and hours and hours long. It wasn't like a race and there was 19 flags in that race, that would be different. It's a very long, drawn-out racing day of driving, plus another day. So I do think like we're in the business of exaggeration and big claims in F1 news sometimes. So you gotta kind of look at actually what's happening and be like, okay, is that as crazy as they're making it to sound? No, but the track does look nasty a little bit in a way. Not mean like nasty to drive, like the walls are so close. There isn't a lot of runoff room, and sometimes it's exactly the kind of race you want to see, but other times it's going to mean that it's going to be hard to overtake, and the race is kind of set in quality, but I don't know. I'm willing to give it a chance. We'll see. Oh, the other thing is Amanda Newey, so Adrian Newey's wife, strikes again because she replies to things on Twitter sometimes. And there was a tweet, it was an interview of Antonio Lobato, who's a Spanish journalist and like sports TV presenter basically, and he was talking about Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso and saying that, you know, Newey's chassis is one of the worst and all this stuff, and she just responds like one word. Sometimes she goes, who? And I think it's really funny. This is the point of communication for her. Like, I love that she scrolls on Twitter sometime and sees someone like dissing her husband and she's like, excuse me, who are you? Let's talk about the meat and the bones of this episode, which is the debrief of the Dutch Grand Prix. I thought this was quite a bang for the way the Dutch Grand Prix goes out. Obviously, the biggest thoughts on everyone's head were like, this is a terrible last race for Max Verstappen at home with his crash. That was kind of an unforced error, basically. But after that, it was an entertaining watch, and I still enjoy that even after the race now. You'll hear drivers say like, well, you know, it was the AI-powered software development that chooses where the battery is going to deploy and you kind of have no control. But sometimes I simply cannot be negative all the time. It will, you know, mess with me. So we're going to look at this race for what it was, and obviously we don't know the battery percentages, so I don't know. But from what I saw, I was entertained. Was it the best race ever? No, but there was a lot of stuff with strategy, going back and forth, a little bit of team orders. So let's get into it. I'm going to go team by team because that's just the easiest way to organize my brain through this. So I'll start off with Mercedes, and basically the main topic for Mercedes has been the George Russell, Kimi Antonelli team orders towards the end of the race, where George Russell was told to invert cars. And he initially questions it, saying like, sorry, is he fighting for the win? Is he planning to catch Norris? And then eventually he does let Kimi by. And Lando Norris at this point was like 11 seconds ahead of them. And while Kimi Antonelli had fitted new tires, 11 seconds with that many laps to go it's tough. At the same time, in the aftermath, George Russell kind of defended the situation because he said that, well, before the VSC, like, Kimi was ahead of me. And that's the important point when it comes to like team orders, I guess, where I hate team orders, by the way, but they're going to use them, whatever. So Kimi Antonelli was in P2 behind Lando Norris, and then the VSC comes out and they decide to pit Kimi, which is going to bring him right behind George. So basically, by telling George to invert, it's putting the positions back as it was. But at the same time, I'm like, why should George listen to that? He's like, it wasn't my decision to pit. It was your decision to pit. You decided to pit, and then you wanted him to get his place back, whether or not he was actually going to chase Lando Norris and, you know, get the win. And now George is vulnerable to like Lewis Hamilton behind him. So like, now what? And it's to George's credit that he kept that P3 in the first place. He was able to defend, you know, the Ferrari behind him, and that's good. But I'm sure in the back of your mind, you're like, what about me, bro? What about me? So I think that's tough. And even Kimi Antonelli was not convinced that his last pit stop was a good idea, that it was too risky. And that last pit stop was like 16 laps before the end of the race. And he is basically like, he said the strategy call had unnecessarily risked both their races. Even though he had been struggling on his previous set of tires, it was just a difficult second half for me, especially in the last stint on the hards. I was struggling, I had little confidence in the car, and it was not easy. Then we pitted under the VFC, and that was a bit tricky. Also, I have to thank George because he made my life a lot easier, but I still think we could have stayed out and gone until the end with the same set because it put us a little bit at risk. I feel we put George at risk with having to let me by and everything. So it's kind of like... And here's the thing with team orders is that every team has different pre-race agreements. They go through a bajillion scenarios, and George Russell has said that, look, at Mercedes, if we're on differing, like, tire strategies or whatever, then we do the team orders. Like, that's how it works here. That's what we do, and it is what it is. And like, that's true. Yeah, like Nico Rosberg back in the day had to let Lewis Hamilton by, even though they were fighting for a championship, and it's team orders. And it's like, you drive the car for the team, so thus they have the authority to tell you that. And some drivers, Max Verstappen, don't listen to that, and they're like, fuck team orders unless it's for me. I'm never giving into team orders. You can try, but you'll fail. So yeah, these teams use it, and I just want to see drivers overtake each other on track. I know it makes them lose time. I know it puts them at risk, but like, it's the only time in F1 you get to see drivers in equal machinery battle each other wheel to wheel, and obviously, selfishly, that's what I want, but hey, you can't always get what you want. And George Russell kind of agreed. He was like, the fact is that Kimi was ahead of me before the VFC. He tried something different to protect us as a team. He kind of copy-pasted what the Ferraris did. And when he was asked, like, could you have kept Kimi behind? He said, yeah, could I have kept him behind? Maybe. But it equally could have been a P5 as well. So in the end, he deserved to be P2, and P3 was a fair result for me. And a lot of people are kind of saying this is the end of George Russell in the championship fight. And I think sometimes as a driver, you might want to think about the long game. And I don't know if that's what George is doing, but it seems like he doesn't want to challenge Mercedes too much in case, like, the problem is once you defy team orders, and I don't think this would have been that big of a deal, but once you really defy team orders, you start to burn bridges, not just with your teammate, but with your team. And I think that's something that drivers have to balance. That's like, I don't always think about outside of the car. I'm just like, yeah, just do it. But sometimes if you defy them and you go too far and you cross a line, then maybe they're not going to help you when you need them to give you team orders. And it's like only at a point where you have nothing left to lose can you defy team orders in that way. I feel like just like in a political team relationship balancing way, like that's also important to think about. So I wonder if that's what George is doing. And yes, of course, he's had a lot of bad luck. He's had a lot of problems from the team's end and the software with all the problems he's had are sure. But like, I think he's trying to be a team player so that when it's, his turn to be the championship leader, they do the same for him, is just like my understanding. I don't know. McLaren had a very off and on race in terms of like Lando Norris very on, Oscar Piastri not so much. And Lando is extremely confident right now, as he should be. And a lot of the questions he was being asked in the post-race press conference were just, it's so different to like Lando at the end of 2024 when he was just like on the radio saying, oh, I'm shit sometimes and this. And it's funny because sometimes Lando Norris will say that, I'm shit, I don't know how to do anything, I'm the worst. And then he'll like win a race the next day. And it's interesting on how, like a lot of people call that mentality and that's not good. But I think for him, he's just like letting that energy go. And then he's like, okay, ready to bounce back. Because here are some of his quotes. He said, I know when the car gives me what I want. On top of that, when I'm driving at the level I am now, I can win races. Blah, 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 blah. It's just when I get what I need from a car, when I have the front I want, when I've got the confidence with the rear on the entries, just when I get what I need to be able to know and predict every single corner, I'm going to win the race. But if I don't have that, even like in the first stint, then there's not much you can do. And then he gets asked another question, and he says, I was driving at a high level for the second half of last year. It's tough to say. It's trickier to drive this car this year in some ways. I do believe I'm able to understand situations better, understand the car in a better way. It's still horrible to drive, but I'm doing a better job of understanding this, relaying stuff to my team, figuring stuff out. So it's not just I'm driving better on track. I'm certainly eliminating my weaknesses on track, and I don't have so many. But it's also how I work off the track. He also says, I don't have the confidence to say, yeah, I can easily fight for a championship for the rest of the season. I know I've won just 2 races and had 2 poles in a row, but the minute I don't have the car I need to fight for a championship, at the minute. Blah, 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 blah. I know the level that I am at now, and I know what I can perform at, and I know just what I need from the car. Oh, okay, this is the big one. I'm confident that I can win every race this season if he, has the car he needs. And it's a completely different Lando Norris, I think. And he also gets asked about his starts and whether his starts are still a weakness. And he says, no, not at all. I'm one of the best starters on the grid. We saw that already from pole. The grip was less than on P2. That was evident today. I don't know why, blah, 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 blah. I'm confident in my first lap. My starts have been very strong, so certainly not what you said. And I think part of this is just you're a world champion now. Like all the doubt from previous seasons, all the doubt of if you can do it is gone now. You know that you can do it, and that's why winning your first is so much harder than the rest of them, because now that doubt of can I do it is eliminated. You have done it. And I think that's what brings out so much more confidence in world champions after, even when they don't have the car they want or the car they need, they know that, okay, if I get what I need, I can win. And I know that. And that's coming out. And I think a lot of people didn't expect Lando. I don't know. I just it's very clear that he's a different driver publicly now that he's won a championship. Maybe he's driving the same way he was last year, but now he just has that like qualification of world champion to show it. But this is very different. Meanwhile, Oscar Piastri had a pretty tough weekend in Zandvoort, I would say. Of course, he had that great overtake on George Russell unexpectedly in the race after the restart, after the red flag, I think. But basically, this is what Andrea Stella said about Oscar's performance. He says that Oscar, at a technical driving point, when the car has this low level of grip, like we saw last year in Mexico or Austin, he needs to adapt the way he drives, the way he thinks, the driving, and his expectations. So basically, he's attributing part of that to the low grip. And he says, this weekend we saw Oscar expressing competitive lap times. And I think in the race, there were two factors that affected Oscar. One was the fact, and this is the team responsibility, when we pitted to cover Russell, we actually lost the position to Russell because of a slow pit stop. And this is on the team, not on Oscar. And in the second stint, on hard tires, we were not able to switch on these tires, and they stayed permanently in a regime of very, very low grip. So there's a couple of things we need to work on. And in the media pen afterwards, it seems like Oscar is not very confident when he's asked, like, oh, what's the difference between you and Lando's car? Nothing. He said nothing. There's really no difference. The McLarens looked like two different cars because Lando won with a big margin over the Mercedes. What do you think is the main issue or difference between the both of you? And Oscar says, one is fast, one is slow. Were you struggling with a certain tire, or what particularly was not there for you? Pace. I don't really have more answers than that. And it's just, I do think like a lot of drivers go through, dips in their career, or they have like periods of struggle. And right now it clearly seems that Oscar is a bit off and not. It kind of reminds me of like early season last year of Lando Norris when he wasn't able to like get grips with the car. He wasn't comfortable in it. He had to do a lot of he couldn't just be natural and instinctual in the car. He had to do a lot more thinking. And it seems like that's the same situation we're seeing with Oscar right now. And we've seen him win races. We've seen him do well and be confident. So I feel like it's just coming back from that. Ferrari was a little bit of a dumpster fire. There's been a lot of talk about team orders or lack thereof. And there's a lot of talk about Charles Leclerc defying team orders. And technically speaking, he didn't get a direct team order. And so in the second stint, Lewis begins to close in on Charles Leclerc as Charles is kind of struggling with the medium tires. And they basically eventually bring him in on lap 43. And the whole point of this was that he was told to box opposite George Russell, okay? George went in, so he stayed out. And then, 2 laps later, at the beginning of the lap, Ferrari tells him to come in. And he's kind of like, what? That kind of just defeats the whole purpose of what we're doing right now. And so at the end of that lap, they say, okay, you can stay out. And then he stays out 1 extra lap, and then he comes in. And there was a lot of thinking that Lewis didn't get the podium because of this. And obviously Lewis was frustrated because he felt like there was just time being wasted. But at the end of the day, Charles didn't get like a message to move aside. It's not like he was told to move aside or invert positions and then they didn't. Maybe Ferrari should have done that. I don't know. And Charles said that he was focusing on his pace and trying to do the best he could for his race. He had a very good first stint and had to stop early to try and undercut the guys in front. That's a bit of a team game sometimes. You've got to put yourself a little bit at risk, especially in the first stint for that. Lewis was very strong in the second stint, and that's the way it goes. Sometimes I'll be frustrated, sometimes he'll be frustrated, but that's the way it is. I just don't think Lewis not getting the podium was solely due to Charles. Obviously, he was on a one-stop strategy, and he probably would have been on those hard tires for the rest of the race. And actually, I would say because of the virtual safety car, because they're in the first safety car, he gets passed by Kimi and Norris. And then the second safety car, the virtual safety car, helps him actually. And he's able to stay out in front of Charles. So I think that actually helps him in the end. But anyway, I just feel like Ferrari made a lot of silly decisions this weekend, and part of it is that they weren't high up enough in qualifying. If they had been higher up in qualifying, they could have started up higher, and then they wouldn't have had this much of a problem. But they were playing around with a lot of the deployment engine settings and between Q1, Q2, Q3, and that's what really, I think, damaged their potential performance this weekend. I'm sure they'll have a look at the team order situation and whether they should have instituted team orders, sometimes the thing with team orders is that the teams want to avoid having to give a direct team order saying invert the cars, saying swap positions, let your teammate by. So they orchestrate it, right? And they orchestrate it in a pit stop. And sometimes, though, that doesn't always go well. So, like, if you're going to go the team orders route, fine. But be clear about it. And also, Fred Vasseur said that towards the end, like, they didn't want to tell Lewis the exact strategy or what was going on because they didn't want their competitors to know. And I'm kind of like, you have to figure out a different situation to communicate in. You have to figure out a way to communicate with your driver, whether it's code words or whatever you're doing, because you can't just have them be in the dark and be frustrated on the radio. That's not good either. I also think with Ferrari, the gap between Charles and Lewis isn't enough to warrant like consistent every time maximizing the result for Lewis. I don't think it warrants that yet. It's 28 points. I just don't think, I don't think it warrants it. And I know people are like, well, you have to choose. You have to choose. And I'm like, do you? Do you have to choose? Even, I think about the championship fight of Lewis to Kimi, and obviously now he's in P3 behind George, but even before, if we take like the last couple of races, Kimi has still outscored Lewis, 4-1 in terms of the last race results, and even before then, even more. So it's like, yes, he's P2 or the next other team in the championship standings, but what are the gains being made to that weekend in, weekend out? Now on to Red Bull. The big news of the weekend was that Isack Hadjar has some kind of wrist injury from boxing, presumably, and that he would not be participating in the Dutch Grand Prix. So Liam Lawson stepped up from VCARB to jump in the Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen, and then Yuki Tsunoda jumped into the VCARB alongside Arvid Lindblad. Now I think Liam did a fine job. He ended up P7. I don't think this impacts his whether he wants to go back to Red Bull Racing and be in that seat. I don't think this specific performance will impact that either positively or negatively, just because it's not like there's much to prove. Him getting kicked out of Red Bull so early on in the season last year was just to show that he shouldn't have been put in. Like, either don't put him in or put him in and give him time to develop. Putting him in for 2 races and then demoting him does nothing. Does nothing except mess with your reputation, and destroys your confidence, those kinds of things. So we'll see. There's been no updates as to whether Isack Hadjar will be back in the Red Bull for Monza or if they'll continue with the Liam and Max arrangement. So we'll see how that goes. Although he drove well, it's just Red Bull is just a dumpster fire sometimes. Max Verstappen obviously came into the weekend on a high with the contract extension announcement. All the silly season rumors about him going to Mercedes, him going to McLaren, they're all dead now, right? Everything is chilling. But going into the race, he gets caught out because it's a bit damp on some of the lines, and it was quite wet in the corner he went on the line in. He thought he saw a dry patch coming. Obviously, he was like, okay, I can accelerate. That didn't work. He has what looked like a pretty big shunt and caused a lot of chaos around him. I will say the shot of the wheel rolling by him as he was getting out, absolute rage bait. That would have sent me over the edge. But not the way you want to end your last home race ever, but I feel like the memories of those 3 wins in 21, 22, 23, they'll have to suffice for now, I suppose. But it's also important to remember, and Max said this too, this is just the end of Zandvoort for F1. There will still be racing there. It's going to be okay. I guess it's just sad to see. At VCARB, we actually had a little bit, not a war of words, we had a little bit of drama and beef with Arvid Lindblad and Pierre Gasly because they were fighting through a lot of this race. And for context, VCARB and Alpine are fighting for P5 in the constructors. And I think after Zandvoort, Alpine is 3 points behind VCARB. Basically, Pierre Gasly in the post-race media believes that VCARB was deliberately compromising his race, and which is kind of true, but that's kind of the name of the game here. Basically, Arvid Lindblad got a drive-through penalty after some of the flag infringement stuff that was happening after Max's crash. He got a drive-through penalty, so basically it's very hard to get points after that. You've lost so much time. So he's kind of being a team player, and basically he stays out on track ahead of Pierre Gasly before his first stop, so kind of holding him back, helping out Yuki Tsunoda to get ahead or whatever. And Pierre Gasly struggled to pass, and that's when he was losing the position to Nico Hülkenberg and Yuki Tsunoda. And then after Yuki passes Pierre, that beautiful pass, Arvid also lets Yuki by. And so clearly they're playing the game, but that's kind of what they're supposed to do here. And Pierre Gasly believes that this cost him 9th place. And and like after Arvid let Yuki through, he kept defending against Pierre, which I don't know why Pierre expected anything different. Well, because he had a drive-through penalty. But anyway, he's basically accusing Racing Bulls of having played a team game to ruin his race. He said, and I quote, "No, I mean VCARB ruined our race. In the middle part of the race, they played a team game for the championship and did it well. It made me lose a position to Nico and Tsunoda, and I don't know how many seconds of race time. So congrats to them, and I can't wait to race them. It's just annoying, but it's Zandvoort. Can't really overtake, and this is going to change in the coming tracks. And the good thing is I have good memory. So yeah, I'm going to make sure we smile at the end of the year." So funny to me. And then Arvid obviously doesn't deny it. He's like, yeah, in the end I played the team game. And then he said, and he was told about Pierre's memory comments, and he said, if he has a good memory, then fine. In the end, we all fight as hard as we can every race weekend. So yeah, I tried to help the team where I could. I'm just like, not to patronize Pierre Gasly, but newsflash, buddy, that's kind of the deal here. Every team, especially for like a midfield team, being that best of the rest team in P5 is really important and the money that you get from the Constructors' Championship, like, it's very important, so obviously. Alpine were embroiled in a little bit of another controversy because at the start of the race, when Max Verstappen had his spin, Franco Colapinto was in the process of overtaking Yuki Tsunoda when Max crashed ahead of him and, triggered the yellow flag before it turned into a red flag and yada yada. And he couldn't stop that overtake on Yuki. It probably would have been dangerous, which caused him to be under investigation, which handed him a drive-through penalty. And Franco, in the media pen afterwards, said, I feel that even though the rules were written, they should be much more flexible, and they should have the criteria to also understand what's safer and a bit more unsafe. If someone is going 30 kilometers an hour slower in the same part of the track and you're overtaking them and a yellow flag comes in, there's not a lot you can do. It's very tricky to react to that. He basically said it's like unjust, and he goes on. And later that day, on Sunday, Franco's main sponsor, Mercado Libre, the chief marketing officer of Mercado Libre, puts out a statement, I think on Twitter, and he says, by the way, this guy tagged the official FIA account on Twitter, and he said, the stewards are killing the integrity of F1. This season, they are proving to be horrible and impacting race results. Incompetence, ? Dishonesty, ? Both, ? Something is seriously broken in that organization's culture. I don't necessarily disagree with Sean Summers, the marketing chief officer of Mercado Libre. I'm not saying he's wrong, but I don't know if saying that publicly as a driver's main sponsor is the way to go here, but he's not wrong. And then on Monday, there's apparently a lot of online abuse towards FIA stewards and stuff like that. And so on Monday, an Alpine spokesperson issued a statement to clarify its stance on the comments above. So Sean Summers' comments saying, as a team, we work closely with the sports governing body on the rules of engagement on track to ensure fair and exciting racing, and most importantly, safety. The statement read, we fully trust the FIA and the stewards when it comes to the policing of these rules and the application of sporting penalties during a live race scenario. And then the FIA put out a little thing about online abuse against stewards and how that's not acceptable, which I agree. Online abuse against anyone, not acceptable. I just think this cascade of statements is so funny, and it's I feel like the driver should be allowed to say, if they don't agree with the FIA, they should be allowed to criticize. Is this a dictatorship? Is this fascism? They should be able to say what they want. Now, the corporate sponsor of one, just etiquette-wise, I don't know what the vibe is. Maybe go through official channels on that. But, low-key free speech. Let the people speak. Free them. Anyway. But also, to speak on Franco Colapinto, he didn't just get that drive-through penalty. He also got 2 points on a super license. And then he also got a 10-second time penalty for a yellow flag infringement later in the race. So, it was just all around a rough time for him. Now moving on to Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso had a heroic P9, which in that empty Sprite can, really heroic. After the red flag period, he was, I think, the only driver to be doing a single stop. So he did 32 laps in the softs and 37 on the hards, or vice versa. And obviously they brought a big power unit upgrade with Honda, and it's just really unclear to see what this means yet. I don't think just Zandvoort is a good enough establishment, and I think they brought the upgrade maybe in Hungary, but I just feel like there's still a long way to go. Yes, there's improvements. The P9 is way better from the vibrating, sternum or whatever, steering wheel that they couldn't hold their hands on for more than 15 laps. Like, we're obviously way past that. And that means the rate of growth is exponential compared to other teams, but I don't want to, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I don't want to be, premature waxing poetry about Adrian Newey and Fernando Alonso, On the other hand, Lance Stroll had some choice words to say, because after the red flag period ended after Max's crash, all the drivers were exiting the pit lane, and after Fernando Alonso exits, the pit exit light, it turned red. And both Ollie Behrman and Gabriel Bortoleto drove past the flashing red lights, and Lance Stroll was basically, refusing to move. And because he told his engineer, Gary Gannon, he goes, the lights are red, and he goes, I'm not going until it's green. And he waits 10 seconds. And that's why they were so behind, I think, initially. So basically, Lance Stroll, over and over and over again during the race after that, is asking about how everyone who went on red should get a penalty. And he's like, they should get a penalty, stop and go. It's really funny because his race engineer is trying to redirect him to the race itself, and he will not. Lance goes, so everyone that went under red should get a penalty. And Gary goes, yep. Stroll goes, stop and go. Gary goes, understood, we'll report it. So the back of the pack, Stroll says, it's just the rules. The back of the pack is in, he's trying to do the, you can build temp, you can do this. And Lance Stroll is like, no, what about those people? He talks about it again later too. It's kind of hilarious, actually. Williams. So not exactly the kind of weekend you want to have as a team who's just re-signed both of their drivers. You definitely don't want them to be making contact with each other. So towards the end of the race, they're both kind of it's a nothing burger. They're in the middle of nowhere, points. Points are not on the line. Let's be clear. So Carlos Sainz was defending from Alex Albon. I think it's 3-4 laps before the end of the race. And essentially Alex was trying to pass Carlos around the outside of turn 1. And on the inside, Carlos hits a bump, and then he locks up with his front tires, which sends him straight basically off the track, also hitting Alex on the way. And Carlos was very apologetic, let's be clear, and he says, as soon as I touched the brakes, I locked up, and I took Alex with me, which is the worst possible outcome for that race, because it's not like we were fighting for anything big, but honestly, it caught me so much by surprise. Apologies to him, that's obviously the last thing I wanted. And he said I deserved the penalty, because he gets a 10-second penalty for causing that incident, but Alex was super chill about it, and I think either they've just lobotomized him to the point of he's like, whatever, but also he said it's not a Verstappen and Ricciardo in Baku, it's less serious than that. Love that he's referring Baku 2018 lore, but he said it was simply on him. I saw him lock up, so I immediately tried to follow him in a straight line, but we made contact and my floor was pretty damaged, so we had to box. In the end, Alex, I think he DNFs basically, and Carlos gets a 10-second penalty. So another disastrous weekend for the Williams F1 racing team, but we move, I guess. Same thing, Haas also had a double DNF. Well, Carlos didn't DNF, but you know what I mean. Esteban Ocon had a power unit issue, which he stopped lap 55, and then Ollie Behrman stopped way before that. I think it's the second start where he was taking soft tires. He was, it's supposed to be in 16th position, but basically he was forced to stop halfway around the formation lap. So shitty weekend for Haas as well, and probably not what anyone wants to see, with Esteban Ocon and the rumors about, his seat being under threat and all that. We also have Audi, which I would say it's a pretty mixed bag for. Of course, everyone's talking about Nico Hülkenberg narrowly avoiding Gabby Bortoleto when he spun. But I think more than that, it's that Bortoleto probably should have scored points. He was P9 in every session except for the race. P9 in free practice 1, P9 in sprint quali, P9 in the sprint, P9 in quali. So I feel like we could have assumed that a P9 was on the cards. However, Nico Hülkenberg did score points. He was fighting with Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda, Arvid Lindblad, that whole crowd, and he ended up P8, which fantastic result for them. Monza is going to be very interesting this year, and I think because Monza is one of those races that has gone from being so territorial, so fully Ferrari, and it still is, don't get me wrong, but there was a time where Lewis Hamilton, where he would say I wouldn't wear my McLaren kit, the shirt and stuff, into the paddock, or like into the track until I got into the paddock, because vibes were not good. And on one hand, sure, it's better that it's not so an antagonistic environment, but on the other hand, races have character because of stuff like that, like the fact that Zandvoort is completely orange for Max, or that, you know, Ferrari and Monza go hand in hand. So we'll see how the vibe is between Ferrari and Kimi Antonelli. I would love to see what happens. Like, they're not going to boo Kimi, but they're not, like, I'm curious to see how support is split, because still I feel like when you go to Monza, it's a mostly Ferrari stuff. But when I went to Monza last year, I felt like I saw so many more fans of other teams, and I do think it's because, like, it's an easy flight into Milan, and then it's like an hour away. Like, it's really easy to get there. I think it's a more accessible race. The tickets are cheaper, all that good stuff. So I'm curious to see what the split between Ferrari and, I guess, Kimi Antonelli fans. It's just like, we'll see. I don't think, you know, Monza's gonna be silver because of Kimi, but maybe in like 10 years, who knows? Anyway, the Tifosi are stronger than that. I don't think they'll let that happen. But oh, the other thing, Kimi Antonelli turned 20, and that's only a big deal because all the commentators love saying, like, the 19-year-old teenage phenom, the teenage Italian wonder kid, like so much so that we understand he's a teenager, like, we get it. And yes, his accomplishments are amazing. He's so young and already has, what, six wins, 6 pole positions, 13 podiums total, leading the championship. Like, it's incredible. But at a certain point, we need a different adjective, a different descriptor for Kimi. So I hope we can get that. I hope the creativity juices are flowing within the commentators.